Hey class, in this recording we're going to focus on the glands of the integumentary system. And when we think of glands or glandular secretions of the integumentary system, most people will talk about sweat glands or think about sweat glands for a good reason, because they are the single most numerous kind of gland in our integumentary system. The technical name for a sweat gland is a sudoriferous gland, and there's two flavors of sudoriferous or sweat glands in the human being. We have the apocrine sweat gland and the merocrine sweat gland. The apocrine sweat gland is typically going to be located in the anogenital axillary region. So right around the groin, the anus, the perineum, or the perineum, and then also in the armpits and around the areola. Notably, beards and men are also going to have some apocrine sweat glands as well. So the cheeks or face. And we find that these apocrine sweat glands are not active until puberty. So they only become activated during puberty. These are the sweat glands that, for lack of a better term, they're the stinky sweat glands. They're the ones that are going to secrete a lot of milky, thick sweat that contains a lot of fatty acids and also is going to contain a lot of extra chemicals, carbohydrates and lipids that can help to foster bacterial growth. It's also believed that these particular kinds of sweat glands are going to secrete pheromones that will influence how attractive somebody smells. So, hey, that person smells really good. I want to get some more of that person. These pheromones or hormone or chemicals that are designed to increase or signal that somebody's sexually viable or post-pubescent. Here we can see a photomicrograph of an apocrine sweat gland. They are very large sweat glands in the body with very large lumens associated with the tubes. And it should be worth emphasizing that it's really stinking hard to find an apocrine sweat gland in a photomicrograph. Most commercially available, pre-prepared microscope slides are going to either have skin harvested from the scalp or the arms or the torso. It's just, there's not a lot of demand to harvest skin and prepare slides from these select parts of the human body. Now, if somebody hasn't maybe showered for a while or has very active apocrine sweat glands, they could have bromhidoresis. Bromhidoresis is the technical name for body odor, or BO. And that's something that everybody has to deal with to some extent. Now, when we think of our ecrine, or also known as merocrine sweat glands, these are very, very common. They're almost everywhere on our body. They're particularly concentrated in parts of our body that have thick skin, so the soles of our feet or the palms of our hand, or on our forehead. When we look at our palms and our soles, these ecrine sweat glands are going to serve to help wash dust away, functionally speaking, from these parts of our body so that we can maintain a high degree of friction. When we think of the high concentration of these ecrine sweat glands on our forehead, functionally speaking, those ones are for a thermoregulation purpose. Now, when you look at the photomicrograph of these ecrine sweat glands, aka merocrine sweat glands, I know for my lab sections in particular, for those of you who had me for the lab, I describe these to you as the sprinkle-covered donuts because we have a little clear white lumen in the middle. We have the cross-sectional view here, so we can see how it's kind of, it looks like a ring or a donut ring. And then you have those dark purple nuclei that are the sprinkles of the sprinkle-covered donut. Merocrine sweat glands, or endocrine sweat glands, will have a very serous or watery perspiration. They're going to serve to help give us a lot of thermoregulation. And these sweat glands have a special kind of cell called a myoepithelial cell. Myo means muscle. Epithelium refers to the fact that this is an epithelial tissue. So this is a special kind of cell that is going to be involved with the glandular secretion, but can also physically contract. So when we stimulate these cells with our sympathetic nervous system, they will physically squeeze sweat onto the surface of our skin. And I know a lot of people when this happens, it manifests when you're just starting to sweat. You'll feel like this prickly, tingly sensation on the surface of your skin associated with the activation of those myoepithelial cells. Now, as we look at sweat, sweat will typically start off as protein-free, and it's a filtrate of the blood plasma. So the liquid in your blood plasma will determine, in your blood will determine what goes into your sweat. Teeny tiny things that are dissolved in your blood plasma, individual ions, individual salts, or anything typically with a molecular weight of less than 300 AMU will be able to make it into the sweat. But really large things like cells, red blood cells, or proteins that are just, really, really large molecules, they are not going to be able to make it into the filtrate that we use to make our sweat. So we typically will have sodium chloride is a very common dissolved salt that makes it into our skin. Some of that sodium chloride makes it into the sweat filtrate. Some will be reabsorbed within the sweat duct or within the duct of the sweat gland. If you have dissolved drugs in your bloodstream, some of those dissolved drugs will be excreted in our sweat. Generally speaking, when we sweat, it's overwhelmingly going to be water, and this water will have an acidic pH range. And the reason it's acidic is because of the uric acid, which is present. And that uric acid will, as it's exposed to the atmosphere, will turn into urea, and then from urea to ammonia. And this is one of the reasons why really sweaty, dirty clothes, if you let them sit for a long time, will just reek and have that ammonia smell with them. I'm thinking of the locker room when I was in high school, and particularly hockey pads or football pads, stuff that just gets covered in sweat constantly, but almost never gets washed. That will typically have a strong ammonia odor associated with it. There's also going to be that uric acid will help to acidify these structures and form what's known as an acid mantle. This mildly acidic environment will inhibit growth of many bacteria. Not all bacteria, but a lot of bacteria. We're also going to have insensible perspiration. So we're constantly sweating and constantly evaporating this sweat, but we just don't feel the sweat that we're evaporating. And this is about 500 milliliters a day, or about 1 pint of water a day. We just lose via sweat, and we never notice this because it evaporates so quickly that it never pools on our skin. I remember for myself in particular, when I was in wrestling and I had to cut weight, I had this insensible perspiration on my skin, and I also had water that I exhaled, and I could count on losing 1/10 of a pound an hour in just water, just by sitting there and doing nothing. So if I just did nothing, over a period of 10 hours, I would lose 1 pound of water weight. We also are going to have diaphoresis. This is when you sweat so much that your skin actually becomes wet, and you can see the moisture and feel the moisture pooling on your skin. If you're a sweaty person, you can lose up to 1 liter of water per hour, and that's under normal conditions. So, you're going for a run, you're going for a jog, and you're wearing a t-shirt and gym shorts. You can lose, 1/4 of a gallon or 2 pounds per hour in body sweat. And maybe you're in a different kind of a situation, like maybe you're cutting weight for wrestling and you put on a snowsuit and then rubber pants, and then you pointed a blast heater at yourself, and then you got on the Stairmaster. You can upregulate that to maybe 4 liters of sweat per hour. But I don't necessarily recommend that. That's not a very pleasant experience. Trust me. So, as we look at our sebaceous glands, we're shifting gears now. We're no longer talking about sudoriferous or sweat glands. We're talking about sebaceous glands, also known as oil glands in common English. But I'm going to call them sebaceous glands, and I'm being picky about this because they do not secrete oil. They secrete sebum, and they secrete the sebum via the holocrine style of secretion. So these glands are going to have vesicles constantly budding off into the gland, the duct of the gland. And this oily secretion, or the sebum, will have lots of phospholipids associated with it, but it will also have proteins and carbohydrates associated with it. And it's going to release, the sebaceous glands release the sebum into hair follicles. So the sebum will serve to lubricate and waterproof the hairs that we're constantly generating. And then the sebum from the hair will get rubbed around on our skin and help to lubricate and moisturize our skin. Sometimes people will buy lanolin and rub it on their dry skin. Lanolin is purified sheep sebum. So another way to think of lanolin, and by the way, if you have dry or cracked skin, lanolin is amazing. It's very effective at moisturizing your skin because it is literally the oil, sebum isolated from a sheep. And sheep produce lots of sebum because sheep have constantly growing hairs. The wool of sheep never stops growing. I know a lot of women in particular, when they start breastfeeding, particularly for first children, they will rub a lot of lanolin around the areola of their breast to help lubricate their breast and reduce the amount of chafing or cracking that may occur, which doesn't occur for everybody. But if it does, I want to highly encourage you to use lanolin. It's very effective. I personally use it on my hands in the middle of winter, or if I'm doing a lot of concrete or masonry work. We also have cruminous glands, aka earwax glands. So in the margins, if you're following along with a printed off presentation, I want you to write earwax gland in parentheses next to cruminous glands. And they are a modified apocrine sweat gland that will release a modified secretion known as crumen, aka earwax. So if somebody has impacted crumen, that's a technical way of saying that they have really thick chunks of earwax in their ears. And this crumen serve an important purpose. It keeps the eardrum or tympanic membrane pliable. It makes it so that it's easier for us to hear. But like most things in life, we don't want too much. We don't want too little. Too little earwax causes the eardrum to become cracked and stiff. Too much will cause the eardrum to be blocked as this impacted crumen or big chunks of earwax build up in our ear. So we need a happy medium. The crumen will serve to waterproof the auditory canal. There are antimicrobial proteins present in the crumen, and we have some vibrissae or guard hairs in our ears, and the earwax will make those guard hairs or vibrissae sticky to keep foreign particles or little creepy crawlers from making it deep down into our auditory canal. And finally, we also are going to have mammary glands. And when we think of a mammary gland, this is a gland that produces milk. So we as human beings are categorized as mammals. So we have hair, we are going to regulate our body temperature, we have placental birth, and we also produce milk for our offspring. And after lactation, or actually during pregnancy and right after pregnancy, while a woman is actively lactating, she will be able to use her mammary glands to breastfeed her child and give that child breast milk. And these mammary glands are a modified variation of an apocrine sweat gland. So there's going to be that very large lumen. There's going to be some myoepithelial cells. And instead of releasing kind of a thicker, oilier secretion, this modified apocrine sweat gland will have a higher water content. It's also going to have a higher volume of release. We find that this secretion is going to be released through multiple ducts, multiple openings at the nipple, or at the tip of the nipple, the distal end of the nipple. And I know we'll talk about this more in the next class when we get to the reproductive system. But I remember when I was a younger individual, I thought there was just one opening at the tip of the nipple because I thought of silicone baby bottles and how there's one little hole at the tip of the silicone baby bottle nipple. But in a human being's nipple, there are actually multiple openings, not just one. So that's why we have the plural right there. That's all we have for this discussion on the glands of the integumentary system. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the class discussion board or to shoot me an email. And as always, class, happy studies.